Pete, and welcome to Just a Few Acres Farm. Today I'm making soup. I gotta put my secret ingredient in here. It's crankshaft pulley. Today and the next 2 days I'm continuing work on this BD282, I guess we could call it our BD292 engine, out of the International truck. I'm going to try and get her all buttoned up, closed in, and I'm headed toward trying to build a test stand for this engine with radiator and everything so I can run it before it goes in the truck. But that's not going to happen in this video. That's a lot of work. Front timing cover, front crankshaft main seal. This side goes in. It's got the lip on this side and it's sealed on the outside. We'll tap her into place here. That'll work. Here's where our cover goes on. First we got an oil slinger. It goes on here on the crankshaft. And then a key. I try to bias the keys a little bit so that they're a little lower in the front than in the back so everything goes on more easily. It'll straighten out when the pulley gets pushed on. How's our soup doing? No? It's simmering. Needs a little curry powder, I think. Here's our timing cover gasket. Two of the bolts on this are through bolts. They go all the way through and they have a nut on the other side. The rest of them thread into the block. See how this has a little wiggle to it, side to side and up and down? I want to leave it loose until I get the pulley set in because it rides against this seal here and you want it to center itself on the pulley, the seal to the pulley. And then we'll tighten the cover down. A little bit of oil. I should have greased this seal. I guess it's going to have to survive with oil now to lubricate it as it slides on. Pulley's done. 100 degrees Celsius. Get her on here before she cools off too much. We're on far enough now to put the nut on and draw it on the rest of the way with the impact wrench. Now that everything's aligned, timing cover can be tightened down. Of course, the whole idea behind boiling the pulley is to warm it up so it expands a little bit because it's a friction fit onto that shaft, and they can be a bugger to get on. Some people bake them. I baked the one for the Super C, but the mechanics manual said to put it in boiling water, so that's what I did. Worked all right. Next I'm going to put in these Welch plugs. Sometimes people call them freeze plugs, casting plugs, soft plugs. They're necessary for making the casting and for cleaning out the water jacket like we did this time around. I'm making a mess because my gun's set really fat. Oh. Welch plug. No flange, it's a Welch plug. Fit it on there. Drive against the outside edges of it to seat it in. And then give her a few whacks in the middle so it expands outward from the cup and seats. There we go. I'm going to try this. I'm probably going to make a mess. I like to put a little sealant on the outside too. Just as belt and suspenders. Oh, perfect. Next I have this side cover. It's called the Tappet cover a lot of the time. And I have a cork gasket for it. Figure out which way it goes. Let's go like that. This is the problem often with these. You see that? That's not even close to being straight. And then at every bolt it's pulled down. So if I run a gasket along this surface, it's going to leak because it's got a high spot, low spot, high spot, low spot. Fortunately, that's pretty easy to fix. It just takes a little patience. That's pretty good. The way to guarantee these not to leak is to just use Permatex Right Stuff and no gasket. I've never had that leak, but I'm willing to live dangerously today. We'll try the cork one. If it does leak, I guess I can replace it. I don't think there's any shame in skipping the gasket and going with something like Right Stuff for leak-prone areas. Just my opinion. The trick with cork gaskets is to tighten the bolts, but not too much. This is the oil pump, and this is a super simple oil pump. It's got the pickup comes in this hole here that dips down into the oil pan. Oil comes in through this hole, comes into here, and gets pressurized by the gears rotating around in this direction. So the oil is flowing around here and getting pressurized, and then it gets shot out here, and from there it comes around and out the outlet. Most oil pumps will shoot it back up into the gallery that runs along the camshaft, but this one doesn't. It has a separate outlet. Assessing these is pretty simple. You look at the clearance of the gear teeth to the shell here, and there's no spec given for this in the mechanics book, but it's tight. A 2/1000 feeler gauge will slide by, but a 4 will not, and there's nothing I can do about it anyway. It's not like replacement oil pump gears are sitting on the shelf someplace. The book does give a spec for end play, and really that's the important thing, is the ability for oil to bypass this and kind of leak back along this face. See, that's the clearance that's important, and there's a little bit of wiggle in the spiral gear here that's driven by the camshaft up and down. So just gravity, I've got it all the way down, and if I lay a straight edge across it, that gear is standing proud of the deck here. So gasket thickness is going to be really important on this one to get proper clearance. The other thing to look for is where the gears have rode in the cover here, and sometimes you'll have to sand this on a piece of float glass and sandpaper to smooth it, but this one has absolutely no wear on it. One gasket came with my kit. Quite often they'll ship more than one, but this gasket is 5/1000 thick, and if I put it all together, well, you go the other way. Just test fitting things here together. That's tight. My gasket is too thin. So what happens in this case? Well, you have to make your own gasket, and for me, that's going hunting through the recycling bins with a pair of calipers and seeing what I can find of the correct thickness. And I happen to find this piece of cardstock that's 12 thousandths thick. This is a set of gasket punches for making round holes in gaskets. Oh, hanging chads again. This is about the lousiest gasket I've ever made, but it's just a test fit gasket. I suspect this material may be too thick. We just want to see. Well, it rotates freely now. So spec end clearance here from this hub to this gear is 2.5 to 5.5. This is a 5.5 gauge. Yeah, I'd rather take at least 1 or 2 thousandths off that. It's a little over spec. So I'm looking for something that's about 10 thousandths thick. Well, I couldn't find anything that was just right. Cardstock seems like cereal boxes and toothpaste wrap, things like that, seem to be about 15 thousandths or 20 thousandths. This is a piece of envelope, and it measures at 4 thousandths. And then I have the original gasket, which measures at 4 to 5 thousandths. I'll put both of them on together, and hopefully that'll equal what we need. Would have been nice if they'd supplied a couple of gaskets in the kit like is typical, but that wasn't the case. It's still too thin. It's locked up tight. That's too thin. Alrighty, this is a piece out of a file folder, and it is right on 10 thousandths. No interference. I'm going to call that good enough. 5.5 thousandths just slides. I took it apart and I put a very thin coat of gasket sealer on this gasket. This will help the pump prime. Creates more of a seal between the gears so that it'll suck oil in. A little assembly lube on the drive gear here. This supply pipe comes out. We're just going to get this started. The pump fits right down in here. Whoop. Get this other end started. Let's do that. You need a touch of bending. Might as well put the pickup on too. This is a floater. It rotates up and down, floats near the top of the oil to keep crud from near the bottom of the pan getting sucked into it. Next is the rear main seal, and it's called a main seal just like the main bearings. It's the main seal around the crankshaft on the back end. It's a two-piece. This is kind of a standard International Harvester design. I'm not really a big fan of them. They're tough to keep leak-proof because of all the intersections you have between things, and because this is soft metal, and just like we saw with the Tappet cover, it deforms at the bolts. So what I did is I put it on a piece of float glass with sandpaper and sanded it smooth. And you can see how much I took off. There's still one area right here where it's unworn, but the rest is all flat. The seal is actually made by felt, and there's two halves. I've had them soaking in oil here for a few hours, and that felt gets pushed into these retainers half and half. It takes some patience to get them in. Maybe it goes that way. It's a little bit thinner that way. Because you got to keep them even and just work them in slowly. I usually start from the middle and make sure both ends are the same length and then push it in, working up each side. And then take a kind of large socket and just start rolling away at it, trying to get it all the way down, pushing on the ends, because you don't trim these. They got to seat together and smush a little bit to make a seal at the seam. Now the bottom half. Your brother was fine, but you're a pain. Yep. I've decided I don't like you very much. Although I flatten this, and that certainly helps. I've given up on trying to seal these with gaskets anymore. I just use Gasket Maker. Again, this is right stuff that I'm using. It's sure to seal it up. Now the hard part, I have to scooch it around in here. The engine stand doesn't make things any easier, and I can't reach the bolts very easily. Of course, it wants to compress against the crankshaft, so you gotta force that. What are you caught on? Get up there. Come out. Not that one. I need you to come out of your hole. Here's a note to anyone doing this after watching these videos. Put the top half of the rear main seal on before you put the crankshaft in. It's a lot easier than what I'm going to have to do. Of course, there's absolutely no mention of rear main seal installation in the manual, but the bolts that secure it won't even fit behind the crankshaft flange. So I tried grinding down a bolt and putting it on here, but you just, with the engine stand in there, you just can't even get it compressed because it's got to compress against the journal there. So what I did is I ground down 3 new bolts so they'll fit in there. I'll put them all, well, I don't know if I'll put them, yeah, I should. Put them all in ahead of time and slide it in there. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to see where the holes are. I got them all in there. And of course, you can't see what I'm doing, but I'm trying to get the bolts started in the holes, and I can't see the holes because the bolts are in the holes. Boy, that is a pain. It's a couple hours later, and I finally got the upper part of the rear main seal in. I had a heck of a time aligning the bolts to the holes down in here. I wound up having to take it all back off and grind like pilots on the ends of the bolts and re-thread them so they would kind of guide themselves to the holes. It was not much fun. I want to show you here, there's a groove in the crankshaft, and when the crankshaft spins, remember it's spinning counterclockwise, it actually works that groove from outside the engine to inside the engine, so it's sweeping oil that accumulates on that felt seal back toward the engine. It's like a corkscrew always spinning around. Now this bottom piece goes on, and there's a couple pins to align it here, and then I put some more Permatex on the bottom side to seal up between the flanges. And a couple bolts go underneath here on the inside. Oh man, it's these 2 bolts. They sure did not make this whole thing easy to work on. I can't fit a ratchet in there. I can't fit nothing in there. Box end maybe. Ugh. Can't even fit my fingers in there. That's a little bit better with the crankshaft spun around, but still. It's day 3. Yesterday was a little frustrating. couple jobs, the oil pump and the rear main seal, that should have taken me, you know, about an hour to do. Took me a long time. That's the way it goes sometimes. You just have to power through it. And then last night I thought about what this engine was like when I took it out of the truck, and how worn out and rusty and nasty and dirty, and now we have this. It's a good feeling. Next job is to put on the oil pan, and I got to trim off excess gasket here at the timing cover so that everything seats down. Other side. This is a weird oil pan configuration. It's got this hump here and this hump back here. The oil pan corresponds to that and goes on. And where these humps are, this is the rear one, there's a huge gap between it and this piece. And it looks like Leak City to me. There's no bolts all through here. And it's the same at the front, although it's not quite as large. So the way they sealed it is you got a cork gasket on one side, cork gasket on the other side, and this big honk and thick piece of cork that goes around this, and I had to do some trimming to get it to fit right, and another big honk and thick piece of cork that I had to cut a little notch in because of this thing here that fits over here. Yikes. On the oil pan you have the same old thing going on. You can see where it's shiny there. Even though it's reinforced on the bottom to help keep things straight, there's an up and down on the surface. Given the large gaps at the ends, I can't just use Permatex Right Stuff to make a gasket. So what I'm doing is I'm bedding this cork in kind of a thin to medium coating of Permatex Right Stuff on the sides. And the same deal for these thick ones at the ends. We're going to have to address that joint. And hopefully the gasket maker will hold it tacked into place. That's got to go under. I sure would like to have a discussion with the engineer that designed this. And then here in the front there's a little lip, and they didn't even machine this surface. It's just bumpy cast that has to make the seal with the cork. This obviously is a trouble spot. It's kind of goofy. And then I'll run beads all along here and on these ends. Say a little prayer and put it all together and hope it doesn't leak. Go around it once, and I don't know, I work from the center out and just snug them. And then go around again and give them a little bit of torque. Cork gasket. Look for squeeze out at the important points like these corners. Yep, it's a mess, probably because I like things neat. I'll go back and trim this after it dries. Squeeze out at that corner. Squeeze out at that corner, because this is where it kind of curves and doesn't make the seal. Good squeeze out all along there. Yep. Roll her over. I think I'm about at the limit of what my engine stand can take here. Next I can put on the oil filter, and I want to explain a little bit how this works. It's both the same and different from what you have later on. First of all, it's a canister filter, and this is what goes inside. Amazingly, these are still available from Wix. They're number 51002, I think. And it fits down here inside the sock. I think is what looks like a regular oil filter. Anyway, I have a new one of these coming. And on top there's a gasket that goes in here and a lid, and you screw it together. This is where this filter mounts, like this. I marked here the hole that's coming from the oil pump. Remember, we have that steel line from the oil pump comes up into here. This hole is not connected directly to the oil gallery that runs along here and feeds everything in the engine. Instead, it jumps through this void and goes back in this hole and feeds the oil gallery that way. And the reason it's that way is so that when the oil's in this void and it's pressurized coming from the pump, it can squirt into this little hole in here and it squirts up into the oil filter. So what you have is just a percentage of the oil coming out of the oil pump that goes through the filter. The rest of it goes directly into the oil gallery. On the Farmall tractors of this era, it's roughly 15% that gets sent through the filter every trip around the system. And after it goes through the filter in this hole, it comes back out this hole and gets dumped through these set of holes here directly back into the oil pan. So none of the oil that's running through the oil gallery and feeding everything else, all the main bearings, rod bearings, camshaft, up the top end, it's not going through the filter before it goes to them. It either goes directly to them from the oil pump through this business here, or a percentage of it goes up and through the oil filter and gets dumped back into the pan, I guess pre-filtered for the next time around. The last thing about this is every oil system needs a pressure relief, and sometimes there's a pressure relief valve right in the oil pump. So when the pressure gets too high, it dumps some of that oil off, because high pressure can be bad like low pressure is. And this assembly here, this little plunger and spring, fits in here, and a plug goes on here. And then inside, as pressure is building, coming from the oil pump into this space, it can press on that plunger that I put in. And when that plunger releases like that, it'll dump oil through here and directly back into the crankcase. Alrighty then, let's put this together. This is the plunger for the pressure relief. Give it a little assembly lube here. Goes in there. Spring, plug, plug, big wrench, gasket. Doesn't quite match what was there, but it'll be all right. And filter. Dipstick. The engine's closed up, at least for the most part. You can see where I put little pieces of tape where this and that small things need to go on it. I have paint for the engine. I was going to paint it in this video, but I got to wait for this sealant to cure up so I can clean it up before I do that. There's a lot left to do. We've come a long way, but there's quite a ways to go. I got to go through the ignition system, mainly the distributor, take that apart, take a look at how the advance is and things in that, rebuild the Holley carburetor on the other side. The exhaust and intake manifolds need some work. I got to fit the bell housing. I got to take it off the stand, put the bell housing on it, because the rear motor mount is actually on the bell housing. Build a stand, put the engine on the stand, take a look at the radiator, see what needs to be done with that, hook everything up, and test fire it eventually. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's just a long process. There's no way around it. I'll see you next time.